I'm Jeremy Ratt. I'm half Indigenous and half white. Pieces is an all-new CBC British Columbia original podcast. This is a story of being stuck between two worlds, and not really fitting in with either of them.
So because I don't have darker skin or long brown hair, that therefore I was not Indigenous.
You don't have to be a residential school survivor yourself to be traumatized by residential school.
Pieces. Listen to it now, wherever you get your podcasts.
This is a CBC podcast.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Phelan Johnson. You may have seen my guest today on the small screen and big screens, or on the stage. Michael Greyeyes is a man of many talents. He's a classically trained ballet dancer, choreographer, director, playwright, and renowned actor. Over his 3-decade-long career, Michael has appeared in some of the most beloved First Nation films, like Dance Me Outside and Smoke Signals. He has taken on challenging roles playing Indigenous leaders like Sitting Bull, Wandering Spirit, Tecumseh, and Crazy Horse. More recently, he's taken the small screen by storm, appearing on hit TV shows like Fear the Walking Dead, True Detective, and the soon-to-be-released NBC comedy Rutherford Falls. Michael is Nehio and a member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. And he joins me now from Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hi, Phelan. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's so great to have you here. So you're in Los Angeles right now, but I want to go back a bit. Can you tell me about where you grew up?
I'm from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatchewan. My mom and dad are from reserves in the middle of Saskatchewan. My dad's from Muskeg Lake, and my mom is from Sweetgrass. And my sister and I, my family, we lived in a couple of places. We're in the Capel Valley, of course, LeBret, and then we moved to Saskatoon, and Saskatoon was where I spent my boyhood until I was plucked from the prairies at the age of 10 years old to attend Canada's National Ballet School in Toronto. And my family and I, we moved from Treaty 6 territory to dish with one spoon territory, so I could pursue dance as a career, potential career.
And so I want to talk about your dance in a bit, but first I want to know, what was it like growing up on the prairies? You know, what do you remember about growing up on the prairies?
So many beautiful things. Obviously, that's home. That's my home. That's where I know about my family, my early years. I remember the sunlight. I remember the skies. I remember my cousins and all my relatives. And I remember playing, just riding my bike with my banana seat all over town.
They need to make banana seats again. They're very comfortable.
They do. Well, in Los Angeles, there's a whole bike culture with really tricked out bikes, and they got banana seats.
So you are known primarily as an actor now, but as you mentioned, you got into the entertainment industry in a different way. You started as a dancer, as a ballet dancer. So how does a kid growing up in Saskatoon end up in the ballet?
Well, by accident, entirely by accident. We were living in Saskatoon, and my mom was a teacher at the School for the Deaf, a very famous school for deaf children in Saskatoon. And my sister and I were doing, little kid things. I was playing hockey, of course, and my sister was taking dance lessons. So Mom and I, we used to wait for my sister in the car. And I was, 5, 6 years old. So I was like super bored, super easily. So I was like, is she done? Is she done? And I would go up and check on her. I remember the classes were at the University of Saskatchewan, and it was kind of like this wild experience as this little kid. I'd walk in, I'd look for her, and then she'd be dancing with these little girls. And one day I decided to really kind of pay attention to what they were doing. And then I blurted out, I was like, oh, that's easy. Teacher overheard me. And she said, oh, well, if you think it's easy, why don't you come on back next week? So I said, I will. And I told my mom all week, I was like, I'm going to dance next week. And she, of course, I apparently said lots of crazy things as a little boy. But as the days got closer, she was like, okay, he's repeating it. He's insistent about this. Why do you think you're going to dance next week? I said, well, the teacher invited me. So I showed up with my mom in tow, and my mom's like, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry, but Michael thinks that you've invited him." And the teacher's like, "Oh yeah, come on in." And that's how it started. Precocious Cree boy pushing his way into a dance class that he hadn't signed up for.
And what do you remember about those first days of dance class, or those first classes that you were taking? Do you remember taking to it right away?
No, I don't remember anything. Weirdly, I remember the hallway outside the dance studio. I remember there was lots of kids there, and I was there, and there was just a lot of activity, and I was kind of nervous about everything. And there are all these girls, like I was the only boy. I think that's probably what kept me in it. I was like the center of attention from all these little girls, because I was like an oddity, right? There was a boy in our dance class, but I didn't care. I guess I enjoyed it enough to keep coming back.
And so then you end up at the National Ballet at a young age. What was the training like there?
Well, it was hard. I remember it was really hard. We trained 6 days a week. I went from a recreational dancer to a professional training program. So there was quite a learning curve, and I remember just sweating. I was like a little sweaty kid, dancing my butt off. And that's what we did, like we were hard workers, and they pushed us. So the transition was tough because they expected a lot from us. And it's like showing up at the Olympic training camp, and you're like, oh, okay. We start with 100 sit-ups. All right, well, okay. I mean, we did sit-ups, but not 100. It was tough to negotiate it, but then that became my new normal. So any other job I've had ever since, even though they might have been difficult or hard, just was never as hard as the training I did at that school. So in a way, I earned my stripes.
At a very young age.
At a very young age, yeah.
And were there any other Indigenous dancers in the program when you were there?
Not immediately, not that I was aware of. I certainly became aware of two other Indigenous girls. One was a little bit older and one was a bit younger than me. I remember Lisa. I think she was Anishinaabe. I remember Santee Smith, who's Angwahoy. Those were my Indigenous sisters in the trenches with me.
Wow. Did you have any favorite roles that you performed while you were there? I'm taking you really far back here.
way back, time machine. I remember doing Nutcracker. I really enjoyed that. That was fun as a kid. And then later I remember dancing when I was an advanced student. I remember dancing with the company in sort of like core roles, like sort of group roles. And I remember that was exciting for me because, I'd obviously been working my way towards joining their ranks. And then finally I was asked to participate in a few shows here and there. So that was exciting.
Hi, I'm Leah.
And I'm Phelan. You know us as the hosts of the podcast, The Secret Life of Canada.
And we've got an exciting bit of news for you.
We do. We want to go to school with you.
That's right. We are now part of the curriculum in a way. We've teamed up with educators from across the country to create teaching guides that go along with some of our best episodes.
We've got teaching guides for Indigenous history.
Caribbean Canadian migration, Black history. Just head to cbc.ca/teaching guides for more info. And it's free.
It's free.
Hi, I'm Michelle Shepard, host of Uncover Sharmini from CBC Podcasts. In 1999, 15-year-old Sharmini Anandavale disappeared on her way to a job that police believed didn't exist. 4 months later, her remains were found in a wooded ravine. I revisit the case that has stayed with me for over 20 years, ever since I first covered it as a cub crime reporter for the Toronto Star. You can find Uncover Sharmini on CBC Listen or on your favorite podcast app.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson. We're talking to Michael Greyeyes about his long career in the arts, which started at Canada's National Ballet School. But eventually, Michael, you began transitioning from dancing to acting. So how did that come about? Was it a difficult transition to make?
It was accidental. It seems as if that's a pattern that's developing in my career path. I was dancing in New York City. I was dancing with the choreographer, a great American choreographer named Elliot Feld. And we were performing, rehearsing in New York City, in Manhattan. I loved the work. I loved I loved how challenging it was and how innovative the work was. He's a master choreographer, so I was learning how theater dance was being made, step by step, count by count. And it was a great job, and I was being challenged with, leading roles. That was what I thought my path was going to be. But then I got injured. I hurt my leg, and so I had to take time off. And I was healing, I was, on crutches, all that stuff. And I ended up traveling to Wisconsin to choreograph for a play, a high school play. And I said, well, I've never done any choreography. And they were like, well, we just, kind of want some help. It's a play called Glory of the Morning, and, it's got Native themes. So we just really wanted your help because we know you're a Native person. So I was like, yeah, fly me up. So I went up to Wisconsin with my crutches and talking with them how they worked. And I was reminded that the work I was doing with Elliot was actually, in a way, more like that kind of performance. And around the same time, I started seeing some of the bigger film projects that were involving our communities. Films like Dances with Wolves, of course, and Last of the Mohicans. And I saw my own people, like I saw myself reflected on these screens. And I said, oh, that's something I could do. Interestingly, while I was injured, I had no money. So I didn't have money to get a haircut. So my hair started to grow and it was starting to get longer. And after I recovered from the injury and I came back, I kept it long. Then that made it a little bit easier because then my hair was like, shoulder length at a certain point. And it made it easier for me to transition into those period roles. Again, an accident of having no money allowed me to get my foot in the door for these period roles.
Wow, that is so interesting. Another happy accident, definitely.
Another one.
So what was the first job that you got as an actor, where you kind of thought, hey, I can do this?
It was on the set of Geronimo, which was a TNT movie of the week. And interestingly enough, it was like a beautiful, beautiful film. I met August Schellenberg on the project and other actors like Kimberly Norris, actually, who amazingly is playing in Rutherford Falls. She's an actor in the show. Like 30 years later, here we are working together again. And it's so exciting to be connecting, across this span of time. And I remember the show was really a beautifully written show. At the time, TNT was doing a series on Native characters. And ultimately, they made Crazy Horse. And I was cast as the great Oglala leader. So that was my introduction to the work. And it was always challenging, but I loved how precise it was. I loved the technicality of it. And I was very much learning on the job, learning how to create characters. And I think my dance background certainly helped with the physical part of screen work. You'd be surprised at how much of work on camera is physical in nature. It's about embodying, it's about what you do physically on screen versus, what you say, that there's this whole terrain that you have to take care of physically in order to allow the vocal work to stand up properly.
So let's take a listen to a clip from one of your early films, the 1994 Canadian classic, Dance Me Outside. In this scene, you've come across Ryan Black and Adam Beach and some other characters as they are target shooting. And they're in the woods, and your character, Gooch, gives them a few tips.
Problem with guns is they're too loud. This is the best way to kill a man. You got the element of surprise. And it's real quiet if you do it right. First thing, if they're a real fighter, you can't get in close, draw some blood. Anywhere. Hand, arm, leg. The sight of their own blood starts them to panic right away. Then go for the throat. You can approach from the front, side, back. It doesn't matter. Because chances are you hit the artery right off. Once hit, You're laughing. See, they can't scream. Because they're drowning in their own blood. You got that?
Cool. That's a bit of Michael Greyeyes as Gooch in Dance Me Outside. So what's it like hearing that clip?
Oh my God. Crazy. So crazy. Two things. I remember at the end of the scene, obviously our listeners couldn't see it, but I had to throw a knife and hit a pumpkin. And I remember I tried a couple times and I missed. And then I did it again and I hit the damn pumpkin. And I was like, yeah, dance training. So that was a great moment for me in that scene. But the funniest part was I watched Dance Me Outside with my teenage daughters a few years ago. And we watched the whole film because they'd never seen it. I was like, I think you guys need to see this. And they were like, Daddy, you're such a baby. I was so young.
Yeah, how old were you? How old were you when you were filming that?
I think I was like maybe 23, 24, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I was 25. I can't remember exactly, but I was a kid. There are no lines on that face.
So what do you remember about this time? You know, this is one of your first feature film shoots. So what was it like for you being on set?
I loved it. It was great. We were filming in Northern Ontario, and I loved the project. And I met a lot of really great actors on it. I think my favorite thing about it was that it sort of had real legs. There weren't many contemporary films about our communities at the time. So Indian country just ate this film up. They were like, oh my God. To this day, when I meet people, some people go, Gooch! Which to me is like, wow, what an honor.
And so, Gooch is an iconic character. Why do you think this character, this tough guy with a soft side, spoke and continues to speak to so many people, especially Indigenous people?
Great question. I think actually what appeals to people, I hope, is that there's real complexity to our communities. I think obviously there's images that we have to contend with that come out of the image-making machines of Hollywood and the media, things that we all grew up with, actually. So there's an element to our portraits of toughness. Obviously, we're survivors, so we are tough. But the duality or the complexity or the layers of us always have another element, whether it's humor or empathy or sadness, that there's always something. Whenever you meet another Indigenous person, they're these beautifully complex people. So when we see a portrait of ourselves on film or in print or whatever that asserts that complexity, I think we respond to it. I know I respond to it. Like Wes Studi's Magua in Last of the Mohicans, that really spoke to me. It was so complex because it danced around these tropes of our brutality and toughness, but at the same time he was so clear about who he was and why he was doing this stuff. So I think that's why we like characters like that.
Mm-hmm. So Gooch, he was a fictional character, but you've also played many real people on screen, including great leaders like Wandering Spirit, Tecumseh, and Crazy Horse. But in 2017, you took on the role of Sitting Bull in Woman Walks Ahead. And this was a pretty big film. It premiered at TIFF. What was the experience of working on that film like?
Yeah, it was a great honor. To play a cultural icon, a hunk papa leader, was truly a privilege. And I take the portrayals of real people, historical figures, pretty seriously. I was like in my late 40s when I approached that role, and I feel like I couldn't have approached it one day sooner, because I would describe the character like 88 keys on a piano. And at some point in the filming, I had to play one of the keys. So there was a complexity to the portrait. When I look at responses to the films, I'm of course really heartened by the Ocheti community, who said you did a good job with him, and so that to me that's like an Oscar, when they tell me that. But to me, the the complexity of the playing, of revealing his layers of humanity, his regret, his humor, his stubbornness, his will to fight only for his community. In an interesting way, every role that I'd had previous to that, there was an element where I had to learn something about performance or about myself or about playing, an emotion or a character. And I feel like every day, I'd call home or I'd talk to my wife and I'd say, oh my gosh, this scene came up and, I didn't know how I was going to play it, but then I was reminded of something from a previous project or a film or where I had to learn something in order to play that moment. Like there's one scene where I had to rope a horse. And weirdly enough, I played a cowboy, a rodeo rider in an indie film called Skip Parts. And I had to learn how to rope. So I practiced for weeks how to rope to do Skip Parts. And then the wrangler said, oh yeah, we need to teach you how to rope. So come on over here. All right, do this. And I did it one time and they were like, damn, okay, well, I guess we don't have to practice that much. So my career was in preparation to play him, to play this leader, his regret, his humanity, his humor, all these things. But it wasn't possible for me to do it without the help of the Oceti people involved in the project, the elders, the language experts, the crew members. We filmed in New Mexico, and there were Lakota people on set. And so I felt support all around, producers, and I couldn't have done it without their help. So I learned something again, that we're not alone when we're trying to make important statements, that we need each other. And I'm grateful to them for that.
It sounds like there's almost a spiritual element to taking on these roles as well for you.
There is. I think there's an emotional toll. I remember once I was coming home from the set, and they dropped me off at the place I was staying, and I stepped out. And I mean, it wasn't like a highly physical role. It wasn't like I was doing battle scenes or anything like that. And he was an older man at the point I portrayed him. And I remember I stepped out of the van, and my legs just buckled. And I was like, whoa, 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 I almost fell over. And I was surprised at the time because I was like, well, I didn't, I wasn't riding a lot today or running up a hill or anything. I'm like, why am I tired? And I realized actually that it was the emotional toll of bringing a character to life. Like there's words on a page and there's actions scripted and you do it. But at some point you have to give over your energy. You have to give over your emotional life and your energy to make a character appear three-dimensional. And I learned that on this film. In order to do something, there's a cost. There has to be a cost. Otherwise, you haven't done your job. You haven't done enough. So I'm always really cognizant of the fact that playing characters now, there's an emotional toll to the work that I do on the set. And I'm grateful for it. But again, you have to sort of take that into account when you take on certain kinds of roles.
And you received rave reviews for your performance in the film. A writer for Roger Ebert's website called your performance subtle, soulful, and believable. Do you feel, any kind of pressure when you're playing these large historic roles?
Certainly. All these historical figures have complex relationships inside their own communities, just like we have complex relationships and kinship connections to people. So I'm very aware that Sitting Bull has many descendants. So I'm always careful about the kinds of choices I make as an actor when I'm playing these parts. And I'm grateful for it. I don't have the freedom to do whatever I want, that there's an obligation, there's a responsibility to a community and to his family, his descendants, in order to paint a picture that I find truthful emotionally, but also that is respectful and authentic to the project and the writing, and more importantly, to my research. So, yeah, there's always an obligation when you're playing someone real, and that's tough. It is.
So something else happens when you reach this level of fame. Critics, they write glowing reviews, and some of your fans, they do something else. So while researching for this show, I came across a number of YouTube videos of you, and they were all very similar. Soft music, still or moving images of usually a shirtless Michael Greyeyes. Have you seen these? And how does it feel to be an Indigenous heartthrob in your 50s, sir?
Well, I became aware of them through my students at York University because they knew I was an actor I am an actor. And they go, Michael, do you know that there are fan clubs for you on the internet? I'd be like, all right, everyone, you're banned from the internet this semester. You're not allowed to. Like, you can't ban us from the internet. I was like, no, you're banned. Of course, I'm deeply flattered by this. I know for a fact, I've got thousands of followers. I think they're primarily female, and I appreciate that immensely. But I don't think that's what I'll be remembered for. I hope not. Because, hey, beauty fades. What can I say? And I'd love to be remembered for something more than just the way I look. I hope I'm remembered for changing our industry. And I love that they do it. I'm honored by it.
Look, I'm just saying, if you ever want to get into the calendar business, I can help sort you out with a photographer. I'd like to get on the ground floor of this.
Thirsty 2021.
Yes, right. So as an actor, you don't always take on serious dramatic roles. There were a couple of years there where it seemed like you were surrounded by zombies on screen all the time. You were in the AMC television show Fear the Walking Dead, playing Kalitaka Walker, and you were also in the zombie flick Blood Quantum from Mi'kmaq director Jeff Barnaby. Let's take a listen to a clip from Blood Quantum. This is your character, trailer, talking zombie strategy.
Everything is blocked off. We got 4-man teams at every blockade. The roads coming in off of 132, and nothing really to worry about. Stragglers still stumbling in from some of the podunk towns on the island, pretty old and mangled. Don't move as fast, so they've been picking them off easy.
Bodies are starting to pile up faster than we can bury them, so we might have to spark up those pyres again, regardless of who sees them. We were getting the same problem on the bridge. Zed's been coming in towny side non-stop. We were wasting ammo trying to keep them from ramping up the blockade. Bumper found a way around that without having to fire a single shot or mop up a single body.
Okay, so right after this, we see a bunch of zombies get shredded in a giant piece of farm equipment by Gary Farmer's character. So how do you prepare for roles like shows and movies like Blood Quantum or Fear the Walking Dead?
It's like Picasso's blue phase or his cubist phase.
Yes, your zombie phase.
This was my zombie phase. Yes. And I'm very proud of that work. I'm proud of Fear the Walking Dead. That was a great show. I love playing Kalitaka, or Taka, as fans call him. It was a really great show. Dave Erickson was the showrunner, really super writers, and it was a great season. I'm a big fan of the genre. Like, I own like tons of zombie DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff, so I'm like crazy into it. I remember when I got the part, my daughters were like, "Daddy, your dreams come true. You're in a zombie movie."
You have another role you've been preparing for your entire life.
Secretly. And then, of course, I got cast as trailer in Jeff's film. Now, of course, I'm a big fan of Jeff. So I was on a panel at Imaginative, and they gave me a screener of File Under Miscellaneous, and I watched it. I was like, this is incredible. Who is this filmmaker? So then he obviously came onto my radar. Then I saw Rhymes, Young Ghouls. I was like, okay, this is incredible. It's like one of the best Indigenous films I've ever seen. So when it came time to audition for Blood Quantum, I was like, are you kidding? What do you want me to do, man? So I sent in some tapes, and I got cast. We didn't end up filming that fall, but we ended up filming the next spring on Ganawage and in Montreal, like Montreal region. And man, it was a cold spring, but we had an incredible time. Maybe the best part was when we all traveled to Gooch, which was Jeff's home community, and we were able to film like key sequences there, which was really important for the film to give us, that sense of place, like where these stories were coming from. So that was that's my crowning achievement in the genre for sure. Is Jeff's film. I'll never do another one.
No way. Yeah, I can see that. You don't want to spoil it.
No.
So we've talked about how you got your start in ballet before moving into acting, and we've heard some clips of your film work. But I want to talk to you about something near and dear to both of us, the theater. How is working in theater a different medium for you?
Theater is an incredible arena for creativity and expression, because the theater, and I grew up in the theater, is where we have much more autonomy and agency to create narratives, tell stories. I feel very privileged that I grew up and was trained for theater life. There's a community and a camaraderie there. You and I have worked together in theater, and there's something profoundly beautiful about the experience that stays with you long after film projects fade away. Like, I'll never forget The River, right?
Oh, yes.
Which was a play that I directed and I cast you in. That we made in the Yukon. So cool. Like, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget the images we made and the stories we were trying to tell. So for me, the theater will always be artistic home. And I created Signal Theater, which is a transdisciplinary intercultural theater company, to explore that work. So I've always wanted to have that kind of agency, because as an actor, you're given a script, you're given a story, and you agree to tell this story. So Signal was a really important development in my personal life, artistic life, and I'm very proud of the work we made.
And one of my favorite pieces that Signal created was a piece called Nokum, and that piece is toured and been all sorts of places, and I loved the story, and I've had the good fortune to see it. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that piece.
I wanted to tell, my dad passed away a number of years ago, but before he did, he divested himself of stories and history to me, my sister, and interestingly, my wife, Nancy. And he was in a place in his life where he just wanted to share these stories. And he gave them to me. And I felt I needed to share these stories more widely. So I wrote Nokum, which means my grandmother in our language, Cree. It was a story about his mom, but it was also a story about him. It was a story about residential school and about family and about memory and the fragility of memory. So I'm extremely proud of that work. I'm so glad I took the time to create it.
So would you humor us and read us a bit of Nokum? It's such a beautiful piece.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm standing in front of the audience. There's various images on the set, like an axe, some firewood. And I look at the audience and I begin. We come from the plains, east of here. Just us, my older sister, my father, my mom. My father from Muskeg Lake, Mom from Sweetgrass. The names of the communities around us form the geography of my world. Muskeg, Marceline, Beardies, Mistawasis, Duck Lake, Okamasis, Carry the Kettle, Saskatchewan. Every kid who comes from Saskatchewan by default becomes a good speller. I remember the oddest things about growing up in Saskatoon. The longest summers in the history of mankind. Spider-Man, the television cartoon. Driving by car to North Battleford, to reserves off the main highways. Spying the strange aluminum bottles of Pepsi-Cola syrup not yet mixed with carbonated water for the concession stands. I remember my cousins and my grandparents. My mom's mom was Margaret. She was all shiny glasses and chubby cheeks. Long, beautiful braids. Linoleum floors and cool stuff everywhere. A rifle in the closet with the bolt removed. A bow, a blue fiberglass bow just sitting there. A drawing by my uncle of an Indian guy on the wall of her basement with big muscles and long braids. I think I stared at it for hours. That was a happy home. Lots of laughter and food. And tears, of course.
That was Michael Greyeyes reading from a scene in his piece, Nokum, produced by his company, Signal Theater. This is Unreserved. I'm Phelan Johnson, hanging out with Michael Greyeyes on the show today. Michael is a Cree dancer, an actor, and a choreographer, and a teacher. So, Michael, in recent years, you were on not one, but 2 HBO shows. Let's talk about season 3 of True Detective. In the show, you played Brett Woodward, a Vietnam vet who's struggling to reintegrate himself into civilian life. He's a man of few words, but the scenes that you were in were incredibly intense. What was it like filming that show?
True Detective. Wow. What a project. First of all, I'm such a huge fan of the series. You know, like I remember when I saw the first season, I was like, okay, this has changed television. And then when I found out, they said, we'd like you to audition for True Detective. I was like, what? No way. So I sent in my tape, and then, a couple of weeks later, they were like, well, are you going to be in Los Angeles anytime soon? Because we'd love to see you, for a callback. And I was like, I remember at the time I didn't have a lot of money, but I was like, I'm flying myself out there because I think I need them to see me in order to get this part. And I read with Victoria Thomas, legendary casting director here in LA. And I remember at the time it was set in Arkansas, and I was like, I think my character has to have a Southern accent. I'm proud of that. I'm really proud of that because Indigenous people are always reflections of the regions they're from. So I wanted to make sure that he was an embedded person. Like when you think about the South, you think about all these communities, Comanches, Seminoles, Choctaw Creek, all these people, they sound like their regions. So I wanted to make sure that Woodard was a product of his world. And Nick Pizzolatto is the writer of the series, the creator. He was also the director for 2 episodes. And I just loved the arc of Brett. He was a beautifully complex, sad, broken man, a Vietnam vet. Of all the performances I've given in my life, I'm particularly proud of that one. And I'm really, really grateful for the soldiers that have responded to it, whether through social media or where they go. Thank you for portraying a person with PTSD with that kind of complexity and nuance. You've honored us all. So I'm really proud of that performance.
So, as I've mentioned earlier, you're in LA right now. What are you working on?
I'm working on a new television series for Peacock. Peacock is the streaming service for NBC. And I'm working on a new half-hour comedy called Rutherford Falls, written by Mike Schur, Ed Helms, and Sierra Teller Ornelas. Of course, everyone knows Ed from The Office and the Hangover movies. Everyone knows Mike Schur from also The Office, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, The Good Place, Parks and Rec, legendary shows. And Sierra is a new showrunner and writer. She's Navajo and Mexican-American. So she's our boss. I have never been on a show where my boss is from my own community. She's Navajo, but I'm claiming her. And this show is going to be fantastic. The cast is incredible. The show is so freaking funny. And I've never done comedy before. You know me. You know me. You know I'm a goofball. And I love to laugh and make people laugh. But of course, I don't get cast that way. I'm often cast as, in dramatic roles, as broken characters or troubled characters. The character I play is Terry Thomas. He's the CEO of a mid-level casino, and he is hilarious. He's a truth teller. He will tell you straight what he thinks. It's completely unvarnished. So because he's so unvarnished, it's hard to hear, but that's where the humor is. And talk with Jana. Jana is the female lead in the series, Jana Schmeiding, and she's Lakota. And I said to her, I was like, this show is so funny because we're so funny, right? We're Native people are really hilarious. Our sense of humor is so dynamite. But she said, there's always something else. It's not just funny, but there's layers to it. There's always layers to us. And she said, there's a kind of a sadness even in our humor. It stays with you long after the laughter sort of subsides. So I'm hoping that it'll have that kind of impact. I'm super proud of it.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson. So, Michael, family and legacy is something that I feel comes up a lot in your work, whether it be pieces like Nokum, which we heard a bit of earlier, or, even I Know This Much Is True, the HBO miniseries you were in. But I also think there's a part of your legacy that lives within your daughters, Lilia and Ava. Lilia followed in your footsteps by training to become a ballet dancer, and Ava has an interest in performing. She was actually an Indian Horse, a film that came out a couple of years ago. So I want to take a bit of a listen to Ava speaking about your influence on her.
A couple of months ago, I spoke on a panel about inclusion and diversity in STEM, and one of the other speakers said something I'll never forget. He said, "Diversity is a statistic, inclusion is something that you feel." Just looking up at a screen and seeing someone like you up there, that is the feeling of inclusion. My dad started acting because he saw Indigenous people up on the movie theater screens, and then I guess I started acting because it was the coolest thing in my world to see him up on that screen too.
So how do you feel when you hear clips like that?
Beautiful. I'm so proud of my girls. They're better than us in every way. Smarter, more empathetic, more creative. I'm really proud to hear that clip. Ava, of course, is a freshman at Yale this year. We're so incredibly proud of her. Lilia is a junior now at Canada's National Ballet School. I'm proud that the work I do is public. I hope it makes an impact not only for my girls, but for other people.
What kind of advice do you give your daughters about working in the arts or a possible career in the arts?
I remember I heard a great piece of advice was being professional means going to work when you don't want to. The words of people like Augie Schellenberg stick with me. When he said, treat people with respect, treat people the way you want to be treated yourself. I've been privileged to have good teachers and to get good advice. So I'm just transmitting it forward.
Michael, I want to thank you for taking time chatting with me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Phelan. The honor was mine.
Michael Greyeyes is Nehio and a member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. He joined me today from Los Angeles. You can catch Michael in his many films, including Dance Me Outside, Blood Quantum, and Woman Walks Ahead. Or you can catch him on the small screen in I Know This Much Is True and Season 3 of True Detective. That's it for this week's episode of Unreserved. If you want to get in touch with us, email us at unreserved@cbc.ca or find us on Facebook or Twitter. This episode was produced by Stephanie Cram, Kyle Musica, Zoe Tennant, and Anna Lazowski. I'm Phelan Johnson. Nyawagoa for listening.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.